Today, I'm going to tell you the incredible story of a struggling single mom. The moment a powerful Mafia boss handed her his credit card to test her honesty. But what she discovered next will truly shock you. So make sure to watch this story till the end, like the video, and subscribe so that new stories keep reaching you. And don't forget to tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? Maya Johnson stepped out of Joanna's diner into the wet neon night, pulling her thin coat tight against the drizzle. The city lights bled pink and blue across the slick pavement, each puddle reflecting a fractured world of color beneath her feet. It was past midnight, the dinner rush long over, and now only the hum of a broken street lamp and the distant wail of sirens kept her company. Maya quickened her pace, anxious to return to the one bright spot in her life waiting at home. 3 years ago, on a night much like this, a lost wallet had changed the course of her life. Tonight, as rain pricked her coffee-brown cheeks, Maya wondered if the ghosts of that night still lingered in the shadows. Maya's footsteps echoed in a lonely rhythm as she passed under flickering neon signs and drawn shop shutters. Her mind wandered back to him, Kim Hyung-nam, the Mafia enforcer whose forgotten wallet she'd dared to return, unknowingly stepping into his world. She could still picture his dark, impeccably tailored suit, and the calm, predatory grace with which he'd studied her that night. In the years since, his shadow had loomed over her life, even in absence. Back then, the city had practically been his to command. Its underworld danced on Kim Hyung-nam's strings. Even now, Maya sensed his invisible imprint everywhere, in the furtive glances of street hustlers who feared an unseen enforcer, in the uneasy truce that kept certain neighborhoods safe after midnight. His power had carved out the shadows of the city once, and she doubted that had changed. She wondered if he still ruled the night from behind velvet curtains and iron fists, or if time had tempered the legend of the man she'd served. She remembered bloody towels on her apartment floor, late-night knocks at her door, and trembling hands stitching up knife wounds by the dim light of a single lamp. He had pulled her into his secret nights as his on-call medic and confidant, a role she accepted out of coerced loyalty. And something more. And oh, how those memories came back, fragments of a life she tried to forget. She remembered a rainy midnight over a year past, when Kim had shown up at her door with a bullet graze across his ribs. Her hands had shook as she cleaned and stitched the wound in her tiny kitchen, the proximity of his chiseled torso under her trembling fingers, awakening a flutter of feelings she dared not name. Afterward, he'd sat on her couch, shirtless and exhausted, and for the first time, let slip a piece of his guarded soul, a hint of a smile, a murmured thanks, an unguarded wince of pain that made him seem human. That was the night their boundaries began to blur. She could still feel the heat of his skin under her palm as she pressed a bandage to his side, the way his dark eyes had softened when she whispered that he wasn't alone. In a reckless moment, they had leaned into each other. Kim's forehead had fallen against hers, and she felt his breath mingle with her own. His hands, usually so controlled, lingered at her waist. They never spoke of it afterward, that almost kiss that hung in the air between them. But it was the spark that ignited everything to come. A month later, on another desperate night, that spark had flared into an unstoppable flame, one that left her gasping his name in the dark of her bedroom, their bodies entwined, hearts bare. Ethan was conceived in that haze of need and tenderness, a secret born from a rare moment when both of them forgot who they were supposed to be. Yet even as something unspoken thrummed between them in those clandestine encounters, Maya had eventually slipped from Kim's grasp. Nearly 2 years ago, without warning, she'd left his employ and disappeared into the anonymity of a distant suburb. It was the only way she knew to protect the fragile new life growing inside her. She could still recall the dawn she slipped away. A hastily scribbled resignation note left at the diner, a one-way bus ticket clutched in sweating palms. Pregnant and frightened, Maya had boarded a Greyhound out of the city before Kim's network could catch wind of her departure. As the skyline faded in the rearview mirror, she remembered pressing a hand to her still flat belly and whispering promises to the unborn child within. Her heart had ached to leave Kim without a word. She knew it would cut him, and despite everything, hurting him was the last thing she wanted. But in her mind, it was the only chance to give her baby a life free from the shadow of Kim's world. Those months in hiding had been a trial by loneliness, scraping by with waitressing and temp jobs in a small town where no one knew her, jumping at shadows, waking with nightmares of men in dark suits coming for her. But it gave her Ethan, and for him she endured it all. She had been raised by a single mother herself, down in a cramped Southside apartment, and she understood firsthand the ferocity with which a mother protected her young. She returned to the city only months ago, drawn back by necessity and lack of options, praying that in the sprawl of downtown she could remain invisible to the underworld she once served. Maya climbed the narrow stairwell to her apartment, each step creaking a warning in the quiet. Mrs. Alvarez from next door had left the hall light on for her, just enough to find the lock. Inside, the air was warm and tinged with the scent of baby powder. The studio apartment was cramped and time-worn, peeling wallpaper stained with old watermarks, a threadbare couch pulled close to the heater, the lingering aroma of tonight's fried diner fare mingling with baby formula. Still, it was a haven, the only space in the world that was truly hers. In a second-hand crib by the sofa, her son lay dreaming. Ethan's tiny chest rose and fell with each gentle breath, oblivious to the storms raging in the adult world. Her days were a blur of early morning feedings, hurried shifts at the diner, and late nights soothing him back to sleep. An exhausting cycle of love and sacrifice that she wouldn't trade for anything. Maya exhaled in relief. Another day ended with her child safe, unaware of the dangers his mother had known. She brushed a tender hand over the boy's curly hair. Sometimes, in certain light, she fancied she saw a glint of his father's intensity in Ethan's big brown eyes. It made her heart twist with equal parts longing and fear. Kim was better off not knowing, she told herself. Ethan was safer without a father who lived by the gun. These were the lies she repeated every day to justify the ache in her chest, lies that held up well enough, until the nights grew long and her memories came flooding back. On more than one occasion these past months, she had caught herself looking over her shoulder on the walk home, certain someone trailed her steps in the gloom. Perhaps it had only been her imagination, the manifestation of guilt and lingering fear. Or perhaps Kim's invisible hand had always been nearby, just out of sight. Before turning in, Maya peered through the fraying curtain over the street below. A lone black sedan idled by the curb, its silhouette sleek and familiar. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she felt sure a pair of unseen eyes were on her fourth-floor window. But as soon as the thought came, the car pulled away into the night, red taillights bleeding into darkness. Maya stayed there long after it vanished, her reflection in the glass uncertain and afraid. In this city, ghosts didn't have to stay ghosts for long. In the black sedan idling below, Kim Young-nam watched the light in Maya's window flicker and then go dark. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Through the rain-beaded glass, he'd glimpsed her slim figure at the curtain a moment ago. For an instant, her face caught the glow of a street lamp. Enough for him to see the worry lines that hadn't been there before, the fatigue in her posture as she turned away. 3 years, he thought. 3 years since that earnest, fearless waitress had stepped into his life and out again. He hadn't intended to park here. After receiving word from one of his informants that Maya Johnson was back in town and working at Joanna's diner once more, Kim found himself drawn to this rundown block on the edge of his territory. Night after night, instinct trumping reason. He should have confronted her immediately, demanded an explanation for her disappearance. Yet each time, something held him back, a rare uncertainty. Instead, he'd kept his distance, ensuring only that she was safe. A quietly posted guard down the street, a discreet inquiry with her landlord to keep unsavory elements away. She hadn't known, of course. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating Kim's reflection in the windshield. His own eyes stared back hard and unreadable. Somewhere in those depths lurked a regret he refused to voice, that he had ever let her slip away. It was time to change that. He tapped the divider, signaling his driver. That's enough for tonight. The sedan pulled smoothly from the curb, melting into the stormy night, and Kim allowed himself one last glance at the dark window 4 stories up. He would see her soon, one way or another. 2 nights later, the rain returned heavier than before, drumming on the diner's roof in a steady heartbeat. Near closing time, Maya wiped down the last empty table, trying to ignore the anxiety that had tailed her all day. The bell above the diner door jingled, and she looked up, expecting a late trucker or perhaps no one at all. Instead, a tall man in a charcoal suit stood in the doorway, rainwater glistening on his broad shoulders. Under the neon sign's electric glow, his face remained half in shadow, but Maya knew that silhouette instantly. Her breath caught in her throat. Kim Hyung-nam stepped inside, the door shutting out the storm behind him. He removed his wet fedora and slicked back a few strands of black hair that had fallen across his forehead. For a moment, he simply stood, his eyes, those same unreadable obsidian eyes, taking in the empty diner and its lone waitress. Then he walked to a corner booth and sat down with deliberate calm. Maya's legs felt rooted to the checkered floor. Her heart thudded a frantic tempo in her chest, echoing the rain. She hadn't seen him in so long. She'd begun to believe he was just a chapter of her life closed and filed away. But here he was, flesh and blood and dripping rain onto the vinyl seat. She wiped her palms on her apron and forced herself to approach, each step measured. "Good evening," she managed, her voice hushed. "Coffee?" Kim inclined his head in a slight nod. "Black. Thank you, Maya." The sound of her name in his low, graveled voice sent a jolt through her. He hadn't raised his tone above polite softness, yet an unmistakable tension crackled in the space between them. Her hand only trembled a little as she poured a cup of steaming coffee and set it before him. She risked a glance at his face as she slid the cup onto the table. Up close, she could see subtle changes time had wrought. A faint streak of silver at his temple, a new thin scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. He looked as formidable as ever, but also wearier, as if the years had weighed on him too. His eyes lifted to meet hers, dark, piercing, searching. Under that gaze, the diner suddenly felt too warm. Maya swallowed and stepped back, clutching the coffee pot like a shield. Rain pattered harder against the glass as silence settled again. Kim finally lifted the mug and took a slow sip of coffee, his gaze never leaving her. Maya realized she was holding her breath and released it quietly. "You're a hard woman to find," Kim said at last, breaking the silence. He wrapped his long fingers around the coffee mug but didn't drink. "I had wondered where you went." Maya's mouth felt dry. 1,000 possible answers fluttered through her mind. None adequate. She lowered her gaze to the checkered floor. "I'm sorry for leaving like that." "Sorry." He repeated the word quietly. Not quite a question. Not quite an accusation. "Our arrangement was open-ended, but I didn't expect you to vanish without a word." His tone remained calm, yet underneath it she caught an edge, like a blade lightly tracing skin. Maya steadied herself. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he murmured, eyes still fixed on her face. "You could have come to me. You know I would have helped." "Help." The word hung between them. Maya almost laughed at the irony. He had been her help and her ruin all at once. He had offered to pay her tuition, to lift her out of poverty, in exchange for her loyalty and silence. And he had done just that, until she realized the golden opportunity was a gilded cage. "Things changed," she said carefully. "My life got complicated and I needed to get out. Away from—" She stopped short. She couldn't quite bring herself to finish the sentence, but the meaning landed between them with a heavy finality. Kim's jaw tightened a fraction. "Away from me." It was not a question. Outside, thunder rumbled, rattling the windows. Maya flinched at the sound. Or perhaps it was at the glint of hurt that flickered in Kim's eyes before being swallowed by his usual stoicism. "I see," he said at last. "You wanted to be free." He set the cup down. "And are you free?" Maya wasn't sure how to answer. Was she free? She worked the same dead-end job as before, barely making rent, coming home to an empty bed night after night. But she had her son. That love was the one pure thing to come out of it all. Still, freedom? No, she thought bitterly, just alone. "I'm managing," she replied softly. "Did you finish medical school?" he asked softly, almost an afterthought. Maya's throat tightened. She shook her head. "No, I had to pause my studies." That was an understatement. She hadn't set foot in a classroom since before Ethan's birth. Guilt flickered in Kim's eyes, or perhaps disappointment. Maya rushed on. "It wasn't because of you. Life happened." She dropped her gaze. A faint furrow appeared between his brows. Concern, disappointment. Maya wasn't sure. Kim produced a sleek leather wallet from inside his jacket, the very one she had returned to him years ago. He counted out several $100 bills and laid them under the edge of the coffee saucer. "Your coffee was worth more than you think," he said, an unreadable half-smile touching his lips. Maya looked at the crisp bills. Far more than the price of a coffee and a polite conversation. Heat flushed her cheeks. "I don't want your money," she murmured, instinctively shaking her head. "It's not a gift, it's payment," Kim replied evenly, sliding out of the booth. He loomed a head taller than her as he stood. "Take care of yourself, Maya. The city can be unkind to those alone." There was that subtle emphasis again. Alone. As if he knew. Maya's fingers tightened around the coffee pot handle. She wanted to ask 100 things. How much do you know? Why seek me out now? But the words tangled on her tongue. Kim placed the fedora back atop his raven black hair. "Good night," he said, with a slight incline of his head, almost like a bow. Then he turned and walked to the door. Maya watched his silhouette blend into the darkness beyond the neon haze, the bell jingling softly as he disappeared into the rain. For a long moment she stood there, her reflection faint in the diner window. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't realized were forming. She hadn't truly understood until this moment how much of her heart was still tethered to that dangerous man. Even now, the ghost of his presence electrified the air. Maya pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the wild thumping within. It frightened her. How easily he could unravel her resolve with a single encounter. Outside, Kim paused beneath the diner's neon sign, rain dappling his shoulders once more. Through the fogged glass, he could just make out Maya's figure as she stood motionless by the window, her head bowed. A rare pang of remorse pierced him. He had wanted to say more, to wipe away the uncertainty in her eyes, but years in the shadows had taught him to mask his feelings. Now, seeing her so fragile behind the glass, he felt that facade crack. Climbing into his car, Kim clenched his fists against his thighs. He replayed every word of their exchange, wondering if he had pushed too hard, or not hard enough. Maya's haunted expression was burned into his memory. He realized that despite his anger at her disappearance, more than anything he hated that she was living in hardship. The thought of her suffering alone these past years lit a slow fuse of fury in his chest. Fury at the world, at himself. No, he wouldn't walk away this time. Come whatever may, he intended to pry open the doors she'd shut and ensure she never had to fight alone again. That night, sleep eluded Maya. Long after she put Mrs. Alvarez's spare key back under the mat and sent the kindly neighbor home, Maya paced the small apartment. Each creak of the floorboards and sigh of wind outside set her nerves on edge. Kim's sudden reappearance had upended the fragile sense of security she'd built. On more than one occasion in the intervening months, she had caught herself glancing over her shoulder, wondering if a dark car idling down the block or a shape in the alley was someone watching her. Perhaps it had only been paranoia. Perhaps not. She peered in on Ethan, peacefully asleep after a warm bottle, envying his oblivion. In the glow of the nightlight, Maya gently stroked her baby's plump cheek, her heart swelling with fierce love and worry. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. But how? If Kim intended to be part of their lives now, could she refuse him? More importantly, after tonight, did she even want to? The way her pulse raced at the memory of his eyes on her suggested an unwelcome truth. Part of her had never stopped yearning for him. Yet the risk he carried with him was the very thing she'd run from. Her heart and mind sparred. Could she truly raise her son in a world policed by gangsters and fear? But then was her current life of scraping by any safer? Kim offered protection and resources at the price of entanglement in darkness. Either choice held danger. The question was which danger she could live with. Maya sank onto her threadbare couch, head in hands. Perhaps Kim's visit had been a one-time intrusion, satisfying his curiosity, nothing more. Maybe he would let her be. She wasn't sure if that thought brought relief or despair. Eventually, sheer exhaustion overtook her anxious mind, and she drifted into a fitful sleep to the lullaby of distant sirens. 2 nights later, Maya's world came unhinged. She awoke to Ethan's thin cries and found his skin burning with fever. By 3 a.m., the fever hadn't broken, only grown worse, turning the toddler's cheeks scarlet and his breaths labored and wet. Panic gnawed at Maya's insides. The clinic wouldn't open for hours. She couldn't afford a hospital, but she couldn't let her baby suffer. Fat raindrops spattered against the window as she bundled a whimpering Ethan into a blanket. He was barely conscious, tiny fingers curling into her shirt as she hurried down the stairwell. The city outside was a blur of rain and darkness. Maya's battered second-hand car refused to start, coughing out only smoke. With a cry of frustration, she abandoned it and stumbled out onto the slick street, cradling Ethan tightly against her chest. Her only thought was to flag a taxi or run the 20 blocks to County General if she had to. Lightning flashed, illuminating the deserted intersection. Maya stood in the downpour, her hair plastered to her temples, tears mingling with the rain on her face. Ethan's wails had weakened to soft, heartbreaking moans. "Please," she whispered into the storm, to no one in particular. "Someone, please." As if conjured by her plea, headlights appeared through the sheet of rain. A black town car surged forward and braked beside her, the splash of water soaking her shoes. The rear door opened and a familiar voice cut through the night. "Get in." Maya didn't hesitate. She slid into the back seat with Ethan in her arms. The door thumped shut, muffling the roar of the storm outside. In the dim interior, Kim Hyung-nam leaned forward from the opposite seat, concern cutting through his composed mask as he took in the limp child in Maya's arms. "Hospital," Kim snapped to the driver, his usual calm shattered by urgency. The car lunged forward. Maya gasped as Kim removed his coat and wrapped it around Ethan and her both, the wool still warm from his body heat. She clutched her son, whispering soothing nonsense, but her eyes stayed on Kim's face. In the passing streetlights, his expression was fierce and focused, a general marshalling for battle. Ethan gave a weak cry. Without hesitation, Kim reached over and pressed his palm gently to the boy's forehead. Maya's breath caught. The gesture was startlingly tender. "Hang on, little one," Kim murmured, more to himself than to them. "We're almost there." True to his word, within minutes the car skidded to a stop under the awning of St. Mary's Hospital. Kim was out first, barking orders. An orderly rushed a gurney out. Maya, drenched and shaking, allowed them to ease Ethan from her arms, though she wouldn't let go of his tiny hand. Inside the brightly lit ER, everything moved in a blur. Nurses, questions, forms thrust at her. Maya stammered something about no insurance. Her vision tunneled with panic until a steady hand closed over hers. Kim stood beside her at the admissions desk, his presence like a wall at her back. He produced a slim black credit card and pressed it into Maya's hand. "Whatever they need," he said quietly. "Do it." Maya stared at the card in her wet, trembling fingers. It was heavy, embossed with his name. She knew the metal card likely had no limit. Her throat tightened. When she didn't move, Kim guided her hand forward, helping her hand the card to the speechless admissions clerk. "Charge everything to that, and get the doctor now," he ordered. The clerk, catching one look at Kim's eyes, bobbed her head and sprinted off. They whisked Ethan away to an examination room. A nurse gently urged Maya and Kim to remain outside. For what felt like an eternity, Maya stood shivering in the corridor, her diner uniform still damp and streaked with Ethan's tears. She could barely feel her legs. Every rational thought had fled, leaving only raw fear. Kim stayed beside her, a silent sentinel. At one point, Maya realized she was gripping his hand. When she tried to pull away, embarrassed, his fingers only tightened around hers, steady and strong. The warmth of that simple contact kept her from collapsing. Minutes crawled by. Maya's mind conjured every terrible possibility. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, whispering a prayer to any god who might listen. Finally, a doctor in blue scrubs emerged. "Your son is stable now," he said with a reassuring smile. "It was a severe fever leading to a febrile seizure. We've cooled him down and given medication. We'll need to monitor him for a while, but he should be just fine." Maya's knees nearly buckled in relief. A sob burst from her chest as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, thank you. Thank you." She released Kim's hand only to find herself wrapped in his arms an instant later. She hadn't even seen him move, but he held her upright as her emotions spilled over. Maya wept into his shoulder, the terror and relief crashing through her in waves. Kim's hand cradled the back of her head. "He's all right," Kim murmured, as if to convince himself too. Maya felt a tremor run through his frame. In that moment, all pretense was gone. He was just a man and a father, shaken at the prospect of losing what he didn't even know he had. Thank you, he rasped toward the doctor, though his eyes never left Maya's face. They were allowed into the pediatric room once Ethan had been settled. Maya hovered over the small bed, stroking Ethan's sweat-damp curls, whispering motherly comforts. The boy was groggy but aware enough to whine for her. She gathered him gently into her arms and sank into a rocking chair, holding him close until he fell into an exhausted sleep against her chest. All the while, Kim stood nearby, quietly observing, a protective guard at the threshold. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead cast shadows under Kim's eyes. Only then did Maya notice how haggard he looked, rain-soaked and weary, worry etched into the lines of his face. He caught her gaze and managed a faint, reassuring smile, as if she were the one who needed comforting. Her heart swelled at the sight. When the worst had passed and dawn neared, the hospital discharged Ethan with a prescription and instructions, thanks to Kim's influence and likely another generous payment. With the immediate danger over, they all craved the refuge of home. Kim's town car met them at the hospital entrance, the driver wordlessly holding the door open as Maya, carrying a drowsy Ethan, slid into the back seat. Kim followed, settling beside her. The sky beyond the city skyline was beginning to pale. Exhaustion weighted Maya's limbs, but her mind refused to rest. She gazed down at her child, finally cool and asleep in her arms, and then up at the man who had moved mountains tonight for their sake. In the close confines of the car, a tentative quiet fell. The tires hissed over wet roads as they drove through deserted early morning streets. Maya mustered her voice. "Kim," she whispered, not wanting to wake Ethan. "Back there." I can't ever repay you." Kim shook his head, eyes fixed forward. "There's no debt between us." "Don't even think of it that way." His voice was low, rough with leftover adrenaline and emotion. Maya bit her lip. She shifted, the edge of her thigh pressing against his in the leather seat. "I was so afraid," she confessed, her words trembling out. "If you hadn't come when you did, I don't know what I would have done." Kim turned to her at that, the faint glow of passing streetlights revealing the hard set of his face. "You're not alone anymore," he said, each word deliberate. He reached out slowly, hesitating just a moment before letting his arm drape around her shoulders. Maya allowed herself to lean into him, careful not to disturb Ethan nestled between them. Against her temple, she felt the steady rise and fall of Kim's chest. They remained like that for the rest of the drive, Maya cradling her son, and Kim's arm a shelter around them both. For the first time in ages, Maya felt the smallest easing of the cold, gnawing fear that had become her constant companion. As the car navigated the final turn toward her neighborhood, she found herself wishing the ride were longer, the dawn farther away. Hours later, near dawn, Maya found herself back in her tiny apartment. Only now it felt smaller than ever, with Kim's presence filling it. The rain had stopped, leaving the city in a damp, pre-dawn hush. Ethan had been treated and given medicine. The doctors assured her he would make a full recovery. Exhausted, Maya had brought her baby home with Kim's insistence that he accompany them. She laid Ethan, finally peaceful and cool, in his crib. In the living area, Kim stood by the window, staring out at the glistening street below, hands clasped behind his back. Maya approached him softly. In the gray twilight filtering through the curtains, he looked almost unearthly, an immovable sentry in her humble home. She touched his arm gently. "Kim, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "You saved his life." Kim turned to face her. For once, the walls in his eyes were down. What she saw there was a storm of conflicting feelings, relief, anger, hurt, protectiveness, all vying for dominance. "You should have told me, Maya," he said quietly. There was no menace in his tone now, only pain. "All this time, I never knew." Her throat tightened. This was the moment she'd been both dreading and longing for. She glanced toward the sleeping child. I wanted to, 100 times, but I was afraid." "Afraid of me?" Kim's mouth twisted bitterly. "You thought I would be a danger to my own blood." Maya felt tears welling. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Not you," she whispered. "Your world, the violence, the enemies. I was terrified what being your son would mean for him." Kim's eyes flickered at the word son, as if it struck him anew. He paced a step, dragging a hand through his hair. "So you ran. You hid my child from me." There was a tremor of hurt under his measured words. Did you really think I would harm you or an innocent baby? That I wouldn't have moved heaven and earth to protect you both? To see the mighty Kim Hyung-nam fighting tears because of her, it was more than Maya's guilty heart could bear. At that, Maya's composure crumbled. A strangled sob escaped her. "I'm so sorry," she managed, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. "I was wrong." Kim closed his eyes briefly, mastering the turmoil inside him. When he opened them, they glistened with unshed moisture. "I would have given up everything to keep you safe. You and him." She had once feared Kim Hyung-nam as a force of nature. Now she feared a world in which even he could not save them. Maya's heart crumpled at the sight of him on his knees, bloodied and defeated. She had been wrong about many things, but never more than about this man's capacity to care. His arms were around her in 2 strides. He pulled her to his chest, and she let herself collapse against him, shaking. Kim's embrace was fierce and unyielding, as if vowing never to let her slip away again. She could feel the strong beating of his heart through his damp shirt. "No more apologies," he murmured into her hair. "We'll fix this. I'll fix this." He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his hand still firm on her waist. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he admitted, so quietly she barely heard it. The raw honesty in his tone made her chest ache. Maya clutched the front of his shirt, anchoring herself in his solidity. Despite everything, his violent vocation, his hardened persona, this was the man who had come for her in the storm without hesitation. The man who held their child's life above any code or duty. In his arms, she felt a safety she had denied herself for too long. Kim tilted her chin up gently. His thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. The air between them trembled with a decade of unspoken words. Maya's breath hitched as his face inched closer. A crash shattered the moment. The apartment door burst open, splintering off its hinges. 3 armed men in dark clothes flooded in like a tide of shadows. In the confusion, a lamp went crashing to the floor and the living room was plunged into semi-darkness. Kim reacted instantly, pushing Maya behind him. "Get down," he snarled. Gunmetal glinted. He had a pistol drawn from under his jacket, aimed steady even as chaos erupted. The intruders fanned out. One, built like a bulldog, trained a handgun on Kim. Another rushed forward. Kim's pistol coughed a silenced shot, and the man dropped with a gurgle. The muzzle flash briefly lit Kim's visage, cold fury etched on stone. "Boss wants them alive," barked the third man from the doorway. In that split second of distraction, the bulldog thug lunged, a muzzle flare and a deafening crack. Maya screamed, ears ringing. Kim staggered back, a bloom of red spreading on his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor. The bulldog moved in and slammed the butt of his weapon against Kim's temple with a sickening thud. Kim crumpled to his knees, blood running down his brow. Maya tried to reach him, but rough hands grabbed her from behind. "Let me go!" she cried, kicking. Over the ringing in her ears, she heard Ethan wailing in the other room, awake and terrified. "Get the kid!" the leader barked. The man holding Maya threw her against the wall, knocking the breath from her lungs. 2 intruders rushed into the bedroom. The baby's cries rose to a frantic pitch. "No, leave him!" Maya sobbed, scrambling after them despite the dizziness. She clawed at one thug's face, drawing blood, but another yanked Ethan out of the crib, swaddling the screaming toddler in a blanket. With a roar, Kim surged back up despite his injuries. Blood ran from the gunshot wound in his shoulder, but his good arm seized the bulldog thug by the throat in a vicious grip. Kim's face was a mask of wrath. "You will not touch them," he growled, each word molten with lethal promise. The big man choked, stumbling back. A sharp click. The leader pressed the muzzle of his gun to Ethan's temple as the child squirmed in his henchman's grasp. "Stand down, Mr. Nam, or I'll paint the wall with his little brains." His tone was chillingly matter-of-fact. Everything froze. Maya, held fast by the man at her side, felt the world tilt. Kim's breath caught as he assessed the scene, Maya restrained, Ethan's life on a hair trigger. His eyes met hers across the dim room. In them she saw desperation and guilt. Kim slowly opened his hand and let go of the thug's throat. The man collapsed, gasping. With a snarl, the bulldog delivered a punishing blow to Kim's midsection. Kim doubled over, dropping to the floor beside the fallen lamp. He lifted his face, bloodied and anguished, toward Maya and the wailing child. "I'm sorry," he rasped, a tremor in his voice. For the first time since she'd known him, he sounded powerless. Maya's heart crumpled at the sight of him on his knees, bloodied and defeated. She had once feared Kim Hyung-nam as a force of nature. Now she feared a world in which even he could not save them. The leader sneered. Apologies won't save them. You brought this on yourself, playing house with a waitress. He spat the word with contempt. The chairman sends his regards. He'll decide what to do with you after we deliver your little family. Maya's heart thundered as the man holding her dragged her toward the door. Another hauled Kim to his feet and shoved him along, while the leader carried Ethan, still at gunpoint. Please, please don't hurt my baby, Maya begged, stumbling on numb legs. No one answered. Outside, dawnlight was creeping in, pale and cold. A van waited at the curb, side door already open. Maya was forced in first, collapsing onto the metal floor. The leader placed Ethan next to her, keeping his pistol trained on them. Ethan's face was red and tear-streaked. He crawled into Maya's arms, trembling. She hugged him fiercely, murmuring soothing words she didn't believe. They shoved Kim in next. His hands were roughly bound behind his back with a zip tie. Maya reached out instinctively and pulled him toward her and Ethan, trying to shield them all with her body. Kim's jaw clenched as if the touch pained him. Not the physical wounds, but the shame of failing to protect his own. The van doors slammed shut, cloaking them in darkness. An engine rumbled to life and they lurched forward. Maya's mind raced frantically. She could barely think past the terror. All she knew was that Kim was here. They were together, and somehow they had to survive. In the pitch black, Kim's shoulder sagged against hers. He was bleeding badly. She could feel the warmth of his blood seeping through his shirt. Kim, you're hurt, she whispered. I'll live, he ground out between ragged breaths. Even now his voice carried a steely resolve. He shifted, testing the plastic binding his wrists. Maya, stay close to me. No matter what happens. She nodded, though he probably couldn't see it. Gently, she guided Ethan's face into the crook of her neck to shield his eyes. The boy had fallen into hiccuping sobs. The van jostled over potholes, its interior reeking of gasoline and sweat. Kim winced as each bump jolted his shoulder. Maya felt utterly helpless, cradling their child in the dark, waiting for whatever nightmare would come next. Her thoughts stumbled in prayer. Please, let us make it through this. But dread seeped in, whispering that perhaps this prayer would go unanswered. Maya's mind spiraled through agonizing visions. Ethan growing up without a mother's love, or worse, not growing up at all. She thought of the birthdays she might never celebrate for him, the bedtime stories left unread. A sob caught in her throat at the sheer injustice of it. I'm sorry, baby, she pleaded silently, pressing a kiss into Ethan's hair. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you safe. After what felt like an eternity, the van screeched to a halt. Harsh voices barked outside. The back doors flew open, revealing an empty warehouse lit by a few hanging work lamps. They were at the docks, the smell of salt and tar in the air, waves slapping against pilings echoing in the distance. Gun barrels gleamed as the men yanked them out of the van. Maya was pulled to her feet, still clutching Ethan, and forced to stand aside under guard. Two thugs dragged Kim out and shoved him to his knees on the oil-stained concrete floor. The leader stood before him, flanked by the others, all with weapons drawn and aimed. Kim knelt unbowed, dark hair falling over his bruised face, his suit shirt soaked with blood. Even now, he exuded a deadly pride. He glared up at the leader. If Chairman Lee ordered this, he just signed his own death warrant. Kim spat, voice raw. The leader laughed sharply. Bold words for a man at our mercy. He racked the slide of his pistol. You failed the chairman's test, Nam. He thought perhaps you'd lost your edge. Now it's clear. You care more about this woman and brat than your obligations. You're compromised. So this is how it ends. A cold horror swept through Maya. This was orchestrated, some twisted proof of loyalty, and Kim had been unaware until now. Her eyes met Kim's. He gazed at her and Ethan with such sorrow that her heart nearly broke. He'd given her his credit card, offered his trust and protection, and it had led them here, to this ultimate crucible. Any last words? He sneered. Time stretched into a heartbeat of eternity. Maya could hear the blood rush in her ears, the ragged hiccup of Ethan's breath muffled against her. A single ray of dawn light pierced a high window, illuminating the swirling dust in the air between the gunman and his targets. In that suspended moment, Maya smelled the ocean's brine and the coppery scent of Kim's blood, every detail etching itself into memory. This was the precipice between life and death, balanced on the pull of a trigger. Maya stood trembling, trying to shield Ethan with her body. She locked eyes with Kim. In that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. If this was the end, they would meet it together. But Kim Hyung-nam was not a man to accept fate lightly. In a blur of motion, Kim lunged. He had slipped free of one loosened wrist tie, a trick perhaps achieved during the ride. With a guttural roar, he propelled himself upward from his knees, crashing into the nearest gunman like a tempest. A gunshot exploded. The thug's weapon discharged wildly into the rafters as Kim slammed his wounded shoulder into the man's chest, knocking him down. Pandemonium ignited. The leader swiveled his pistol toward Kim, fury contorting his features. Before he could fire, Maya, heart leaping into her throat, did the only thing she could. She threw herself sideways, twisting to shield Ethan and simultaneously careening into the leader's legs. The impact was clumsy but enough. The man cursed as he stumbled off balance, his shot flying wide. Another goon rushed at Kim with a knife. Kim caught the glinting blade with his bound hands, the steel slicing into his palm as he wrenched it free and drove it back into the attacker's thigh. The man howled and fell. The leader regained his footing and trained the gun on Maya, who was sprawled on the ground curled around Ethan. "Stupid bit," he began, finger tightening on the trigger. A thunderous crack echoed. The leader's eyes went wide, his words dying in a wet choke. A dark hole blossomed in the center of his forehead. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Behind him stood Kim, swaying but upright, a smoking pistol in his bloody hands. Maya realized in astonishment that one of the fallen men's guns had ended up in Kim's grasp, perhaps kicked up in the scuffle or taken from the knife man. Kim's chest heaved with labored breaths, his injured arm hanging limp, but his aim had been true. The remaining thug decided this was a losing battle. Dropping his weapon, he bolted into the maze of crates and out a side door into the dawn. His footsteps faded. For a moment, only the gentle lapping of harbor water and the distant cry of gulls broke the silence. It was over. Maya uncurled, sobbing with relief, clutching a wailing Ethan tightly. Kim staggered forward, tossing the gun aside. He nearly fell to his knees, but caught himself on a crate, determination keeping him on his feet. His eyes were fixed on Maya and the child, as if nothing else existed. Maya rushed to him, still holding Ethan. Kim reached out, and she pressed her son into his good arm. Without hesitation, Kim folded Ethan against his chest. The toddler clung to his shirt, crying. Kim's face contorted with emotion as he buried his face in the boy's damp curls. His entire frame shuddered, not from pain or exhaustion, but from sobs he would not let fully surface. Maya wrapped them both in her arms. The three of them knelt amidst the fallen, bathed in the first glow of sunrise filtering through the broken warehouse windows. Maya's tears mingled with Kim's blood as she held her family, because that's what they were now, bound by trauma and love and an unspoken promise. In the delicate hush of dawn, amidst the fallout of violence, they found a fragile peace. At last, Maya drew back slightly, noticing the crimson soaking Kim's left shoulder. Panic fluttered through her anew. "You're hurt. We need to stop the bleeding," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Kim managed a faint, lopsided grin despite the pain. "It's nothing. Just a scratch." But he swayed on his knees, betraying his weakness. Maya shushed him gently. She tore a strip from the hem of her own already tattered uniform and pressed it firmly against the wound. Kim hissed at the pressure but didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted a trembling hand to cover hers, helping her staunch the blood. In that simple act, Maya saw the trust in his eyes, a trust that had been hard-won and sealed in blood and sacrifice. Kim lifted his head. His eyes searched Maya's face desperately, as if seeking absolution. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, voice fractured. "I never meant for any of this to touch you or him." Maya shook her head and placed a finger gently to his lips. "You came back into my life, and because of that you saved us," she said softly. "I was wrong to shut you out. We need you. I need you." Her voice trembled on the admission, but she meant it. Whatever comes now, we face it together. A tear finally escaped Kim's eye, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He leaned his forehead against Maya's, Ethan cradled between them. In the delicate hush, The only sounds were their intermingled breaths, and Ethan's sniffling whimpers finally quieting. Morning light gradually spread its gentle wings through the shattered warehouse windows. The violet shades of night yielded to a soft amber glow that fell upon the three of them, washing the scene of carnage in an incongruous peace. The first birds began to sing somewhere beyond the docks, their melody timid but hopeful. In that light, the blood on Kim's shirt looked less stark, the bruises on Maya's arms less severe, like wounds carried out of a long darkness and into the healing day. As the sun inched over the horizon, Maya thought back to the night at the diner, when Kim had handed her that black credit card, a simple act that had set into motion a storm of reckoning. It had been a test none of them knew they were taking. A test of trust, of loyalty, of the lengths to which they would go for each other. Kim had sacrificed the loyalties of his old life tonight. She knew the Underworld would not let such a rebellion go lightly. There would be repercussions, dangers lurking beyond this sunrise. But as she looked at Kim now, she saw no fear in him, only steely resolve. He would fight the whole world to keep them safe. And she, in turn, would face any darkness at his side, unafraid at last. Whatever moral ambiguities and dangers lay ahead, they would meet them side by side, bound by a fierce love, a mutual dependence, and the promise of hope beneath the neon-stained sky.